If you haven't seen my last video, October didn't go as planned, but here is to making the best of the rest of this year. Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a big old pile of books that are out of frame that I really want to get to in the next 2 months, in the rest of 2019. So I'm going to start with the 2 books that I was sent by the publishers. So the first book here was sent to me by Osusume Books. They reached out to me via email. They asked if I would be interested in receiving something from them, and they asked a little bit about what I like to read, what I've read of translated Japanese fiction. And so I responded saying that the only Japanese author that I'm aware of that I have read in translation is Haruki Murakami, and that I wasn't a huge fan of his treatment of women, but that I would be interested in exploring translated Japanese fiction, especially women's fiction. And so they sent me Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami. One night when she is drinking alone in a local bar, Tsukiko finds herself sitting next to her former high school teacher. Over the coming months, as they share food and drink sake, and as the seasons pass from spring, cherry blossom to autumnal mushrooms, Tsukiko and her teacher come to develop a hesitant intimacy which tilts awkwardly and poignantly towards love. So in addition to the book, they made me a cute little parcel with this beautiful little bookmark that I've left in here to use while I read. And there is a handwritten note as well, sort of describing the plot, not the official back blurb, but somebody else summarizing it in their own words. I would really like to get to this so that I can get in touch and offer my feedback and my thanks. So thank you to Osusume Books for sending this to me, and I'm very much looking forward to reading this in the last few months of this year. The next thing that I'm going to share with you guys that I would like to read soon is so the publishers at Entangled Teen reached out to me and asked, hey, would you like to read a book about sick kids? In the past, I have been quite critical of sick lit. I wrote a couple of essays about The Fault in Our Stars by John Green in my undergrad, and way back at the beginning of my channel, I always talked about doing a sick lit video essay, and then the topic of sick lit sort of just died away and I never went back to it. But it is something that I'm cognizant of. I have researched briefly the history of sick lit for young adults, and so when they asked if I would like this box, I said sure. I'm not really sure what I was expecting. I like YA, I like critical thinking, so they sent me this box. It's very cute. Okay, so I'm gonna save the most important thing for last. So they sent these, a little container of those candy hearts with the words on them, except these are all personalized with the names of the characters and phrases that are relevant to the book. They sent a notebook with a quote from one of the characters in this book. It says, "I love that you exist in this world." It's just a cute little lined notebooks. I am a notebook fiend. I am a very analog person despite doing a lot of things on the internet, and the pen fits in the little pen loop, which I think is really great. I, of course, received an advanced reader copy of Sick Kids in Love by Hannah Moskowitz. I will read the back for you. Isabel has one rule: no dating. It's easier, it's safer, it's better for the other person. She's got issues. She's got secrets. She's got rheumatoid arthritis. But then she meets another sick kid. He's got a chronic illness Isabel's never heard of, something she can't even pronounce. He understands what it means to be sick. He understands more than her healthy friends. He understands her more than her own father, who's a doctor. He's gorgeous, fun, and foul-mouthed, and totally into her. Isabel has one rule: no dating. It's complicated, it's dangerous. It's never felt better to consider breaking that rule for him. It says right on the front, they don't die in this one. Because a lot of this sick lit fits into that voyeuristic misery porn for able-bodied folks. This is where I struggle with a lot of these diverse issue books that are selling diversity, and the selling feature of this book is, ooh, we have an interesting minority that you've never heard of. New York Times bestseller. it's like Oscar bait, right? A lot of these sick-lit books feel like the literary equivalent of Oscar bait. They're gonna get people talking just because they're doing something people haven't seen before, but are they actually doing a good job? Are they actually being responsible or realistic? Do authors have that responsibility? Do publishers have that responsibility? I struggle a lot with sick-lit is what I'm coming back to, especially when it's not own voices. So the most important part in this box for me was in this little blue envelope. And it is a letter from the author that explains how, quote, incredibly easy Sick Kids was to write. The first draft went so quickly and honestly, nothing big ended up changing between the first words I typed and the book you're holding in your hands now. And I think it's because for the first time in all the books I've written, I didn't have to put myself in the mind of a healthy person. I didn't have to ignore all the tiny, annoying things that I have to take into consideration on a daily basis in order to put myself in the shoes of my main character so that she could get what she wants. Isabel has to think about those things too, and she still gets what she wants, end quote. The author herself experiences chronic illness and is writing this book from that lived perspective, which gives me hope that own voices perspective coupled with they don't die in this one, because one of the big things in sicklit is characters who deviate from the good model sick person. And historically this has been true. Like there was a whole series of books in the 80s or 90s, don't quote me on the date, but they are like early YA literature where girls who had cancer, they were all like cancer books, and girls who had cancer who performed normative femininity. They got up every day, they put on their wigs, they put on their makeup, they dressed feminine and pretty, and they tried to date a boy, and like they successfully got in a relationship with a boy. Those girls cured their cancer by performing normative femininity. Anyone who deviated from that, who was like, fuck it, I'm sick, I'm not wearing a wig, I don't need to look feminine to be worthy of taking up space in this world, those girls were punished and they died. So there's a long history of the linking of performance of normative gender, especially normative femininity, with living, or the rejection of that and dying. And so I'm very excited that this is coming from an own voices perspective, and that like right on the front cover it says they don't die. We're not getting into that perverse, voyeuristic, pick up a book that you know will make you cry kind of read. It was really cool to be sent this, and I am very, very excited to get to Sick Kids in Love. This publication date is November 5th, which is fairly soon. Probably won't finish it by that date, but I would like to finish it in the month of November anyways. The rest of the books here are a mixed bag. 3 of them I owe reviews to my patrons for. The first is Dude You're a Queer Slur by CJ Pascoe. I am reading and enjoying, but it is dense, and so a review didn't come out in the month where my patrons voted on it. The next won the August vote, which is If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. And again, like there's really no excuse other than I didn't carve out enough time for these. So I think what I have to do first of all is be cognizant of like my time and prioritize. Like I think in August and September, like I also had a bunch of obligatory reading for real life. Not that my patrons aren't part of my real life, but like the work that gives me a paycheck at the end of every 2 weeks. So these sort of got pushed to the side, and so I would like to rectify that before the end of 2019, and then maybe going forward rekajig that tier to make it more manageable for me and let like the patrons are getting what they promise, not just voting on things that go into space. So patrons, if you are part of the tier that votes, know that I am working on these. The last one here is A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir of Lady Trent by Marie Brennan, which again, I'm excited about all of these. It's just, I have to carve out space. So I'm gonna do it before the end of the year, and then do some brainstorming about that. So next thing that I'm working on still is Harry Potter und der Stein der Weisen, the Harry Potter German translation, as I'm working on my German skills. And this is actually really fun because I just finished my Harry Potter reread in English, and so it is fun to just tackle them in another language. I will say that I have some interesting vocab building, some of it useful, some of it not so useful. So I do want to finish this before the end of the year, and then once again, going into 2020, review my German learning and German reading goals, because I think I was a little too ambitious what I ended up taking on in terms of paying work and what I ended up taking on in terms of like hobby, which is learning a language. I also have to read by mid-November, so this is actually one of the first things that I have to read, Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is lesbian necromancers in space meets the Hunger Games. It is truly bizarre, weirdly dry humor, kind of dark, kind of spooky. Love the vibes. It took, like, everybody that I've sort of checked in with over the past couple of weeks have all had the same issue, that it was really slow to get into. And a couple of us actually started reading it and was like, did Emily pick a second book in a series? Like, this is immersive fantasy, and holy shit, does it really just like pop you right down smack dab in the middle of the world and expect you to catch up. It's not cool in publishing right now to like write like a genesis of your fantasy world. I've seen like publishing writerly advice say that you as an author might like write that first chapter that builds your world, and you might write all the way up to the point of like your character, and like the advice when you are submitting that manuscript is basically to cut the book right when that action starts, throw that in your like writerly notes, and move forward with the action. Like, nobody wants your preamble, fill in what comes, and this is almost taking that advice to the extreme where it throws you so smack dab in the middle of it that you're like, did I miss something? Was there a whole other book? Which is why it was a little bit slow to get into, because you're kind of like chewing and digesting all of this information and piecing together this really complicated world. But about 100 pages in, it starts to become worth it. So I do want to finish that for the book club. I have a couple of books left over from October that I still really want to get to. The first is Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab. My intention for this year that was thrown out long ago was to do just a month of Victoria Schwab and read as many of her works as I could, and somehow that just didn't end up happening. So I would like to read at least one more Victoria Schwab in 2019, and if it's Tunnel of Bones, a cute middle grade about a girl who can see ghosts and who's traveling the world to the most haunted places with her like ghost explorer parents, it just seems perfect. Also left over is Interview with the Vampire, the first book in the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. This is a book that I have never read before. I am endeavoring to read more women who write horror. More on that in a minute. I'm currently finishing up my reread of Dracula, and I think it will be really fun to go from Dracula into Interview with a Vampire and see how the vampire has changed and grown between Dracula and Anne Rice. I have two Shirley Jackson books that were on that list, and I would like to read one of them. So, The Haunting of Hill House. 4 seekers have arrived at a rambling old pile known as Hill House. Dr. Montague, Theodora, Luke, and Eleanor. As they begin to cope with the chilling, even horrifying occurrences beyond their control or understanding, they cannot possibly know what lies ahead, for Hill House is gathering its powers, and soon it will choose one of them to make its own. We've always lived in the castle, says, living in the Blackwood family home with only her sister Constance and her uncle Julian for company, Mary Cat just wants to preserve their delicate way of life. But ever since Constance was acquitted of murdering the rest of the family, the world isn't leaving the Blackwoods alone. And when cousin Charles arrives armed with overtures of friendship and a desperate need to get into the safe, Mary Cat must do everything in her power to protect the Family Remaining. Both sound very creepy, and I would love to read a Jackson before the end of 2019. This is where I'm talking about more ladies of horror. This is Monster, She Wrote, The Women Who Pioneered Horror and Speculative Fiction by Lisa Kruger and Melanie R. Anderson. So this is exactly what it says on the tin. Some of these are surprisingly old. A lot of them are names that I haven't heard of before. If you've been around for a while, you've probably watched me do this with many of these anthology type things, these like bite-sized readers. You know what? They're almost, I think, now that I'm thinking about this, these are almost like bathroom reads. Like you leave this beside your toilet for your guests to peruse, and like there's just enough information for them to read and then put down. So I usually take it with me in the car, and then when I'm waiting to pick someone up, I will read. It's that idea of like something that's designed to be picked up and put down, and so I would like to keep plugging away at this. The last book I have here I am nervous for now because it sounds right up my alley, and there was a lot of hype around it when it was first released, and I was really hyped for it when it was first released, and now a lot of folks whose opinions that I trust are DNFing it and unhauling it and saying that it's not worth the 700 pages. Like the payoff is not worth the 700 pages. But I do still want to give this a chance for myself because I was really looking forward to Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. I love The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I'm gonna give it a try, and if it's not meant to be, pass it along. I have several YA books that I would love to read, and I picked all of these up because of my new favorite podcast. It is called Harry and Katniss and Hazel and Star. The hosts are Joe and Brenna. Joe is a film reviewer, critic, largely of horror films, and he also runs the podcast Horror Queers, which I find kind of hit and miss because I haven't watched a lot of the horror movies that they're talking about. I love Brenna, who is just like a perfect little cinnamon bun of a human. She is a former Canadian voice actress, so if she sounds familiar, that's why. And she is an academic, and I believe she teaches children's lit courses or like media criticism courses that largely involve children's lit. Their podcast is great, and the beginning section of their podcast, they always do homework where they talk about things that don't fit into the format of their podcasts, which is book to film adaptations. So things that don't have filmic adaptations, they cannot cover based on their gimmick for their podcast. So their homework section is just to talk about other things that they're reading. And so I have 4 books here that they have mentioned, they put my antennas up on. And so let's start with the biggest one, which is Rainbow Rowell, Wayward Son, which is the sequel to Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, which is her writing the series based on the fan fiction that Kath in Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell is writing. So it's a little bit like tangly and fun, and basically Carry On is gay Harry Potter with kissing. If you're down for gay Harry Potter with kissing, Wayward Son. I feel like Wayward Son did not get that publicity push. I don't know if I mean, my life fell apart in October. I wasn't on the internet a lot. I don't know how many people talked about this. I know I heard her talk about it on the podcast, and I was like, what? This has come out? I went to our bookstore and we were behind on vendors, so the Wayward Son was on a skid for like a whole extra week, and like nobody had any issues with the fact that we had 0 copies come release day. Nobody was looking for it. So I hope this is good. And I'm just looking for cute, light things to round off the year, because Christmas is gonna be hell. The other thing that, actually I think these are all things that Brenna has mentioned. Dear Sweet Pea by Julie Murphy came out recently. This is a piece of middle grade fiction. Julie Murphy wrote Dumplin', Puddin', and Ramona Blue. She is does she identify as fat? I don't know if Julie Murphy identifies as fat, but all of her characters are plus-sized, body-positive, badass women. Reading Julie Murphy is like getting a hug. I don't know any other way to explain it. They are just cozy, lovely reads, and I can only hope that her steps into middle grade are the same. So this is about Patricia Sweet Pea DeMarco, whose parents are getting divorced, and their plan for making this not stressful for their child is to live in nearly identical houses on the same street. In the one house between them lives their eccentric neighbor, Miss Flora May, the famed local advice columnist behind Miss Flora May I. And so it just sounds kind of like silly and cute, and also like perfect for young folks who are maybe experiencing or living through parents getting divorced. I'm excited for this. Then I have Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. So this is an Indigo staff pick of the month. I don't think we got to vote on this one, actually. I'm part of the group that reads and votes to pick the staff pick of the month at the bookstore that I work for, the Canadian chain retail across the company. You can join, blah, 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 whatever. Oftentimes you get like pretty samey fantasy novels, and it's like, which one's better? Which one can you sell better? And that becomes the staff pick. And then there are like standout books that they're just like, no, we know you'll all like this anyway. And they just slap the staff picker on it. Pretty sure Darius the Great was one of those. And so I never read it because I was like, well, I don't have to vote on it. I'll just pick it up when it comes out, and I never did. It's now out in paperback. I never picked it up in hardback. Breathe. So this, from what I understand, is about Darius, who speaks better Klingon than Farsi, and he knows more about Hobbit social cues than Persian ones. He's a fractional Persian, half his mom's side, and his first ever trip to Iran is about to change his life. His clinical depression doesn't exactly help matters, and trying to explain his medication to his grandparents only makes things harder. Then Darius meets Sohrab, the boy next door, and everything changes. Soon they're spending their days together playing soccer, eating falude. I am so sorry. Talking for hours on the secret rooftop overlooking the city's skyline. Sohrab calls him Dariush, the original Farsi version of his name. Okay, I don't know how long ago that stopped recording. For whatever reason, feel like there's something queer. There's a queer element to this book. And Becky Abertally loves it, and I love Becky Abertally. I trust her opinion. And here's the really embarrassing thing. The Lost Coast by Amy Rose Capetta. Brenna and Joe talked about on the podcast. I can't remember at all what it's about, but I remember them talking about it and going, I need that in my life. Do we have a copy of this in at work? Checked the next morning at like 4:45 a.m. before I clocked in, and I was like, yeah, we have a copy. This is coming home with me. And I have no idea what it's about. I'm gonna guess it's about queer characters because rainbows are on the front, and like this matches a lot of queer texts that exist in publishing right now. Let's see what the blurb says. There's a chance that you'll get lost in the woods and you won't find your way out. Danny didn't know what she was looking for when she and her mother spread out the map of the United States and Danny put her finger down on Tempest, California. What she finds are the Greys, a group of friends who throw around terms like queer and witch like they're ordinary and everyday, though they feel like an earthquake to Danny. But Danny didn't just find the Greys. They cast a spell that called her halfway across the country, because she has something they need. She can bring back Imogen, the most powerful of the Greys, missing since the summer night she wandered into the woods alone. But before she can find Imogen, Danny finds a dead boy with a redwood branch through his heart. Something is very wrong amid the trees and the fog of the Lost Coast, and whatever it is, it can kill. This has like, I think, perfect autumnal fall vibes. Like it's super rainy here in November, usually if it's not snowing. So now I remember, and I'm excited for this. The second to last book I have here is Slay by Brittany Morris. This is another book that I was sent by the publishers. This is sent to me by Simon & Schuster Canada. So thank you to Simon & Schuster for sending this to me. I think I've thanked them before because I have started reading this before and talked about it before. I started this and I was enjoying it, and then everything sort of fell apart and it got put to the wayside. But because this is something that I have been sent by the publishers in exchange for an honest review, I would like to keep up my end of the bargain and read it, especially because I was enjoying it. So, I should tell you what Slay is about. So Slay is about a Black female game developer who, it sounds like she's almost sort of made a RuneScape. I don't play video games, but like that's what it sounds like. Everything is sort of like tongue-in-cheek, black powery, and like from her perspective, like it's a space that she's carved out for Black folks that is missing in mainstream video games. But then there is a murder of a Black boy in the real world over this like in-game money. It draws media attention to the game, and it draws eyes that were not intended to view the game on the game, and it gets called out as this like racist pile of trash, which was not her intention at all, and that's about as far as I am. I'm curious how she's gonna fix this. The last book I have here, I have started today, sort of picked it up off the shelf on a whim, and that is Pleasure Activism, Politics of Feeling Good, written and gathered by Adrienne Maree Brown. So Adrienne Maree Brown is a fat, queer, Black woman who embraces all of those terms. Quote, "I believe that all organizing is science fiction, that we are shaping the future we long for and have not yet experienced. I believe that we are in an imagination battle, and almost everything about how we orient towards our bodies is shaped by fearful imaginations. Our radical imagination is a tool for decolonization," end quote, for destruction, for dismantling systems. I really like that idea. I am really genuinely curious to see where she goes with this pleasure activism. That brings me to the end of today's video. I have a nice little circle of books sort of laid out in front of me that I want to get to in the last bit of this year. If I could get to even half of these books in November and December, I will be quite pleased with myself. Let me know what you're looking at reading in the last bit of this year. Before we go, we have to thank my patrons. Oh shit! Speaking of my patrons, we're doing the Red Rum Book Club, which is the Stephen King book club where we read a Stephen King book a month. The Stephen King book for November is Salem's Lot. Thank you, patrons, for making videos like this possible. I really appreciate your support. If you are interested in becoming a patron, in getting access to patron exclusive videos, because I have a couple of those now, they might eventually at some point in the future become public to YouTube, but right now they're just for the patrons' eyes. They are for tiers 2 and 3, folks who pay for early access to videos, your name in the credits of the video, another perk, and obviously my gratitude for you supporting the work that I am trying to do with this channel. Thank you, patrons. Links, as always, are in the description box down below. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you all soon. Bye.